The Grand Archive of Velcora stood as the most famous academy in all the known galaxy, and on this particular morning, the largest lecture hall was filled with students from dozens of different worlds. Professor Thyris Malvine walked to the center of the stage, her forearms moving gracefully as she activated the holographic display system behind her, and a hush fell over the crowd of nearly 300 young minds. "Today," she announced in her deep, melodic voice, "we begin our study of the most fascinating and tragic species the galaxy has ever known." The lights dimmed, and a blue and green planet appeared in the air above them, spinning slowly and beautifully in the darkness. "This was Earth," the professor continued, "the homeworld of a species called humanity. And everything you think you know about them is probably wrong." In the back row, hidden beneath a dark hood, a young woman with pale skin and dark hair watched the spinning planet with eyes that held secrets older than anyone in that room could imagine. Her name, at least the name she used here, was Lyra, and she had been attending this academy for 3 years, without anyone discovering what she truly was. The insectoid student beside her, a friendly creature named Chitrix, leaned over and whispered, "I have waited all semester for this lecture, as the humans are my favorite subject to study." Lyra nodded but said nothing, keeping her eyes fixed on the image of Earth as it floated like a ghost above the professor's head. Humans emerged from this small, unremarkable planet approximately 12,000 years ago, Professor Malvine explained. And for most of that time, they were confined to their single world, fighting among themselves and slowly building their civilization. She waved one of her hands, and the display changed to show primitive humans hunting with spears, then farming with simple tools, then building great cities of stone and metal. But then, merely 400 years ago, something changed inside them, and they looked up at the stars and decided that their small planet was not enough. The display shifted again, showing rockets lifting off from Earth, then sleek silver ships traveling between worlds, then massive stations orbiting distant suns. In just 200 years, humanity spread to 3 star systems and established colonies on 17 different worlds, the professor said, and there was genuine amazement in her voice. This was a rate of expansion that the galaxy had never seen before. A student in the front row, a tall being with scales and golden eyes, raised his hand and asked, "Professor, how did such a young species advance so quickly when older races took thousands of years to achieve the same?" Professor Malvine smiled, showing rows of small pointed teeth, and answered, "That is the great mystery of humanity, and the answer lies in their unique psychology." She pulled up new images showing humans working together in groups, building structures, caring for their sick and wounded, and playing with their children. Humans possessed something rare in the universe, she explained. They had an almost supernatural ability to cooperate, to form bonds, and to sacrifice themselves for others, even for complete strangers. Lyra felt her throat tighten as she watched the images of her people flash across the screen, and she had to remind herself to breathe slowly and keep her emotions hidden. They called it empathy, the professor continued, and it drove them to do incredible things that other species found impossible to understand. The display showed a human running into a burning building to save someone else's child, then another human giving food to a starving alien refugee, then a group of humans standing arm in arm against a much larger enemy. "This is what made humanity dangerous," Professor Malvine said softly. "Not their weapons, not their technology, but their ability to make others believe in something greater than themselves." Chitrix turned to Lyra again and whispered with excitement, "Can you imagine meeting a real human and experiencing this empathy for yourself?" Lyra managed a small smile and replied quietly, "I think it would be quite an experience." The professor continued her lecture, explaining how humanity's first contact with alien life had changed the galaxy forever. When humans encountered the Velcorian trade ships 350 years ago, they did not attack or flee as most primitive species do, she said. Instead, they invited our ancestors aboard their vessels, shared their food and drink, and asked to learn about our culture. Images appeared showing humans and Velcorians sitting together, laughing and exchanging gifts, and the students murmured with amazement. Within 50 years, humans had made peaceful contact with over 40 different species, the professor explained. And they treated each one as potential friends rather than threats or resources to exploit. She paused and looked out at her students with a serious expression on her face. This was beautiful, she said. But it was also the beginning of the end for humanity, because there were powers in the galaxy that did not want friendship and equality spreading among the stars. The display changed to show dark ships with cruel angles, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. The hegemony. Professor Malvin said the name like a curse. They were the masters of the galaxy for 10,000 years, ruling through fear and keeping other species as slaves and servants. Lyra's hands curled into fists beneath her sleeves, and she felt the old familiar anger rising in her chest. The hegemony watched humanity spread their dangerous ideas of freedom and friendship, the professor continued. And they became afraid, because wherever humans went, slave populations began to rebel and demand rights. She showed footage of alien slaves rising up, chanting human slogans, and holding signs written in human languages. The hegemony realized that they could not defeat humanity in open war, because too many species had grown to love them, Professor Malvin said. So they decided on a different approach. A cowardly and evil approach that would haunt the galaxy forever. The display went dark, and the professor's voice dropped to barely a whisper. 312 years ago, the hegemony released a bioweapon designed specifically to kill humans, and within 6 months, a species of 12 billion souls was reduced to silence. Tears were flowing freely down Lyra's cheeks now, hidden in the shadows of her hood, and she bit her lip hard to keep from making any sound. We call this event the silence, the professor said sadly, because one day the humans were everywhere, laughing and singing and filling the galaxy with hope, and then they were simply gone. The lecture hall was completely quiet, and many students were wiping their own eyes. No human has been seen alive in over 300 years. Professor Malvin concluded. Their worlds are quarantined dead zones. Their ships are museum pieces. And their story has become a legend that we tell to remind ourselves of what we lost. She looked up at the empty space where Earth still floated. Next session, we will explore what made humanity so special, and why the galaxy has never been the same since they left us. Lyra remained in her seat long after the other students had filed out, staring at the holographic image of her homeworld. And somewhere deep in her heart, she made a decision that would change everything. 3 days passed before the next lecture, and Lyra spent most of that time alone in her small dormitory room, looking at old photographs that she kept hidden in a secret compartment beneath her bed. The pictures showed her family, her friends, her home on a world that the galaxy believed was dead. And every time she looked at them, she felt the weight of her mission pressing down on her shoulders. She was not just a student, and she was not just a survivor. She was a scout for the Hidden Fleet, sent to observe the galaxy and report back on whether humanity could ever return to the stars they had once called home. On the morning of the second lecture, Chitrix found her in the dining hall and sat down across from her with a tray of food. "You seem sad lately, Lyra," the insectoid said with concern in her clicking voice. "Is something troubling you?" Lyra looked at her friend, this alien who had shown her nothing but kindness for 3 years, and she felt a sharp pain in her chest. "I'm just thinking about the lecture," she replied carefully. "The story of the humans affects me deeply for some reason." Chitrix nodded her triangular head and said, "I understand. as it affects me too, and I never even met one of them." They finished their breakfast in comfortable silence and then walked together to the Grand Archive for the second session of Professor Malvine's famous lecture series. The hall was even more crowded than before, with students sitting in the aisles and standing along the walls. And Lyra had to push her way to her usual seat in the back row. Professor Malvine appeared on the stage, looking tired but determined. And she began without any greeting. "Today we will discuss what made humanity truly unique," she announced. "And why even now, 3 centuries after their extinction, we still study them with wonder and regret." The holographic display activated, showing a human family sitting around a table and sharing a meal together. Humans had a concept they called love, the professor explained. It was a form of attachment so powerful that it could override their basic survival instincts and drive them to do impossible things. She showed images of humans protecting their children from danger, caring for sick strangers, and even dying to save people they had never met. A human mother once lifted a crashed vehicle off her trapped child, Professor Malvine said, even though the weight should have been far beyond her physical ability, because love gave her strength that biology could not explain. The students gasped and whispered among themselves, and Lyra smiled sadly beneath her hood. But love was not limited to their own kind, the professor continued. Humans formed bonds with every species they encountered, including those that other races considered monsters or enemies. The display showed a human child hugging a massive predator that should have eaten her, and both the child and the creature looked perfectly content. "This is a Volcorian war beast," Professor Malvine explained, pointing to the predator. "My ancestors bred them for violence and destruction. Yet somehow this human child convinced it to become her protector and friend." She pulled up more images showing humans with aliens of every shape and size, always smiling, always touching, always finding ways to connect. The hegemony called this the human infection, the professor said bitterly, because wherever humans went, their ideas spread like a disease through the population. A quote appeared on the screen in glowing letters, and Professor Malvine read it aloud. "Humans do not hope because they have a chance. They have a chance because they hope." The words hung in the air, and Lyra felt tears threatening to spill from her eyes again. This was written by a human philosopher named Marcus Chun, the professor explained, just 1 year before the silence, and it perfectly captures what made his species so dangerous to tyrants. She began pacing across the stage, her forearms gesturing as she spoke. "The hegemony ruled through despair," she said. "They taught their slaves that resistance was futile, that the universe was cold and uncaring, and that only obedience could bring survival." The display showed images of alien slaves working in terrible conditions, their eyes empty and hopeless. But then humans arrived, Professor Malvine continued, and they looked at those same slaves and said something revolutionary. Another quote appeared on the screen. "You deserve better than this, and we will help you fight for it." The professor stopped pacing and faced her students directly. "Do you understand how dangerous those words were?" she asked. A single human saying "you deserve better" could undo 10,000 years of hegemony control in a single moment. She showed footage of slave rebellions breaking out across the galaxy, with oppressed species rising up and demanding freedom, many of them carrying human flags or wearing human symbols. The hegemony calculated that if humanity continued to spread, their empire would collapse within 3 generations, Professor Malvine said. So they decided that humanity had to be destroyed completely and permanently. Lyra felt Chitrix reach over and take her hand, and she realized that she was shaking. "Are you all right?" Her friend whispered. "Yes," Lyra lied. "Please continue watching." The professor moved on to discuss humanity's other remarkable traits, their creativity in art and music and humor. "Humans laughed," she said with wonder in her voice. "They made sounds of pure joy for no practical reason at all. and they taught other species to laugh with them. She played a recording of human laughter, and the sound filled the lecture hall like warm sunlight. Many students smiled without knowing why, and a few even tried to imitate the strange happy noise. They created beauty for its own sake, the professor continued, showing paintings and sculptures and buildings that serve no purpose except to make people feel something. They told stories about heroes who never existed, just to inspire real heroes to rise up and follow their example. Images of human books and films and games flashed across the screen, each one carrying messages of hope and courage and love, and they never stopped trying. Professor Malvine said softly, "No matter how many times they failed, no matter how impossible the odds, humans always believed that tomorrow could be better than today." She paused and looked out at her students with an expression of deep sorrow. "This is why we mourn them," she said. "Not because they were powerful, but because they made the rest of us believe that we could be better too." The lecture ended, and students began filing out slowly, many of them talking quietly about what they had learned. Lyra stayed in her seat, staring at the now empty stage, and she thought about the hidden fleet waiting in the darkness beyond the galaxy's edge. 400 million humans, the descendants of survivors, watching and waiting and hoping that someday they could come home. She wondered if the galaxy was ready for them, if these aliens who wept for humanity's memory would welcome them back or fear them as ghosts. Risen from the Gravikitrix touched her shoulder gently and said, "Come, let us get some food and talk about something happy." Lyra nodded and stood, but as she walked out of the lecture hall, she made another silent promise to herself. She would watch. She would learn, and when the time was right, she would show them all that hope never truly dies. The third lecture came on a gray morning when clouds hung low over the academy, and somehow the weather seemed to match the dark subject that Professor Malvine would discuss that day. Lyra walked to the Grand Archive alone because Chitrix had fallen ill with a minor infection, and she was almost grateful for the solitude. Today would be the hardest day of all, and she was not sure she could hide her emotions from her observant friend. The lecture hall was quieter than before, with students speaking in hushed voices and avoiding each other's eyes, because everyone knew what today's topic would be. Silence. Professor Malvine took the stage looking older than she had the week before, her forearms hanging limply at her sides, and when she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "What I am about to tell you is difficult to hear," she began, "and some of you may wish to leave, but I believe we owe it to humanity's memory to face the truth of what was done to them." No one moved, and the professor nodded slowly before activating the display. 312 years ago, the Hegemony's High Council met in secret to discuss what they called the human problem, she explained, and the records of that meeting were only discovered 50 years ago. Documents appeared on the screen, written in the angular script of the Hegemony, and translations scrolled alongside them. They debated many options, Professor Malvine said. Military invasion was rejected because too many species would defend humanity, and economic pressure had already failed because humans simply shared with each other and refused to compete. She pulled up a specific passage and read it aloud. "The human spirit cannot be broken through conventional means," the ancient document stated. "Therefore, we must eliminate the humans themselves." Lyra closed her eyes and breathed deeply, trying to stay calm as the old wounds tore open in her heart. The Hegemony scientists spent 30 years developing a bioweapon, the professor continued. A virus that would only affect human DNA and would spread through air and water and touch. The display showed scientific diagrams that meant nothing to most students, but everything to Lyra, who had studied the plague that killed her ancestors in horrifying detail. They called it the gift, Professor Malvine said with disgust in her voice, because they planned to deliver it as a gesture of friendship. She showed footage of Hegemony diplomats visiting human worlds, shaking hands with human leaders, and exchanging presents wrapped in beautiful paper. The humans welcomed them, the professor said quietly, because that was what humans did, and they never suspected that those gifts contained the seeds of their destruction. The display changed to show the first cases of the plague appearing across human space. People collapsing in the streets, hospitals overflowing with the sick and dying. The virus worked slowly at first, Professor Malvine explained, giving it time to spread to every human world before anyone realized what was happening. Medical records scrolled across the screen, showing the desperate attempts of human doctors to understand the disease and find a cure. Human scientists identified the artificial nature of the virus within weeks, the professor said. But by then, it was already too late, and more than half their population was infected. Lyra remembered the stories her grandmother had told her. Stories passed down through generations of survivors. About the terror and chaos of those final months, some humans tried to flee to remote colonies or hidden stations. Professor Malvine continued. But the hegemony had planned for this, and they sent ships to spread the virus to every corner of human space. The display showed human refugee ships being intercepted and boarded, with hegemony soldiers in protective suits walking among the terrified passengers. They wanted to make sure that not a single human survived, the professor said, her voice cracking with emotion, and they very nearly succeeded. She paused to compose herself, and several students in the audience were openly crying. The galaxy watched in horror as humanity died. Professor Malvine continued. Many species wanted to help, but the hegemony controlled all the major trade routes and threatened war against anyone who interfered. She showed records of alien ships trying to reach human worlds and being turned back by hegemony blockades. My own ancestors sent medical supplies and doctors, the professor said, but they were stopped at the border and forced to watch from a distance as an entire civilization was murdered. The display changed to show empty cities, abandoned homes, and mass graves stretching to the horizon. In 6 months, 12 billion humans became 12 billion corpses, Professor Malvine said, and the galaxy's brightest light was extinguished forever. Lyra could not stop the tears now, and they flowed silently down her cheeks as she watched the images of her people's genocide play out on the screen. The hegemony declared victory, the professor continued bitterly, and they told the galaxy that humanity had fallen to a natural plague, a sad but inevitable consequence of their rapid expansion. She showed hegemony propaganda broadcasts, claiming sympathy for humanity's fate while celebrating secretly in their council chambers. For 50 years, this lie was believed, Professor Malvine said, until rebels infiltrated the hegemony archives and stole the truth. The display showed the documents being leaked across the galaxy, and the outrage that followed as species after species learned what had really happened. The revelation sparked the Great Uprising, the professor explained. A 100-year war that finally destroyed the hegemony and created the Galactic Concord we live in today. She showed images of alien species fighting side by side, carrying banners with human symbols, and shouting human slogans. They fought in humanity's name, Professor Malvine said, because even in death, humans inspired others to stand up against tyranny. The display went dark, and the professor stood alone on the stage. We won that war, she said softly, but we could not bring back what we had lost. And every species in the Concord carries the guilt of surviving when humanity did not. She looked out at her students with tears in her own eyes. This is why we study them, she explained. This is why we remember their stories and preserve their artifacts and teach our children about the species that died so that we could be free. A student raised her hand and asked in a trembling voice, Professor, is there any chance that some humans survived? Professor Malvine shook her head sadly. Search parties looked for survivors for decades, she answered. But the bioweapon was too effective, and the hegemony was too thorough. and every human world was confirmed empty. She sighed heavily. Humanity is gone, she said. And all we can do is honor their memory and try to live up to the example they set for us. The lecture ended, and students filed out in silence. Many of them holding each other, and weeping Lyra remained in her seat, surrounded by empty chairs. And she let herself cry openly for the first time in years. She cried for her grandparents, who had fled into the darkness, for her parents, who had grown up in hiding, and for herself and all the other humans who had spent their lives as ghosts in a galaxy that believed them dead. But beneath the grief, a flame of determination burned hotter than ever. The galaxy needed to know the truth, the real truth. And soon they would learn that hope never dies as long as even one heart still believes. The final lecture arrived on a morning that sparkled with golden sunlight, as if the universe itself wanted to witness what was about to happen. Lyra had not slept the night before, because she had spent hours talking with her superiors in the hidden fleet through an encrypted communication device hidden in her room. They had given her the mission to reveal herself, and more importantly, they had given her a mission today. Everything would change. Kidrix met her outside the Grand Archive, fully recovered from her illness and buzzing with excitement. "I cannot believe this is the last lecture," her friend said. "I wish it could go on forever, because I have learned so much." Lyra smiled and took her friend's hand, knowing that their relationship would be very different after today. "Whatever happens," she said quietly, "I want you to know that your friendship has meant more to me than you can imagine." Chitrix tilted her head in confusion, but did not have time to ask questions. Before they were swept into the lecture hall by the crowd of students, the room was packed beyond capacity, with beings standing on each other's shoulders and hanging from the ceiling fixtures, all desperate to see the conclusion of Professor Malvine's famous series. Lyra took her usual seat in the back row. But today, she did not hide beneath her hood. Today, she let her pale face and dark hair show clearly to anyone who cared to look. Professor Malvine appeared on the stage carrying a small box, and her expression was both sad and proud. "Today we conclude our study of humanity," she announced. "And I want to show you something special, something that captures the true spirit of the species we have lost." She set the box on a table and opened it carefully, revealing dozens of small objects wrapped in protective cloth. "These are artifacts recovered from human worlds," she explained. "Personal items that tell the stories of individual lives." She unwrapped a small golden ring and held it up for the audience to see. This wedding ring was found on the hand of a human woman who died protecting her children, the professor said. She had barricaded them in a shelter and stood guard outside until the disease took her. Students wept openly as the professor showed more items, a child's drawing of a family holding hands. Beneath a yellow Suna letter from a father to his daughter, telling her how proud he was, a medal awarded for bravery in saving strangers from a fire. Each item represented a life cut short, a story ended too soon. And Lyra felt her heart breaking with every new revelation. "But the item I want to show you now is my favorite," Professor Malvine said, "because it represents everything that humanity could have been." She activated the holographic display, and a photograph appeared larger than life above the stage. It showed a young woman in a black graduation gown, holding a diploma and smiling with pure joy, her dark hair flowing in an invisible breeze and a small scar visible along her jaw. This photograph was recovered from a university database on Earth, the professor explained, and it was taken just 3 months before the silence began. She gazed up at the image with tears in her eyes. "Look at her face," she said softly. "Look at that smile and tell me you do not feel the weight of what we lost." The students stared at the photograph, and many of them nodded with sorrow. She was studying medicine. Professor Malvine continued. She wanted to heal people and save lives, and she had her whole future ahead of her. The professor paused and wiped her eyes. "We do not know her name," she admitted. The database was corrupted, and only this image survived. But somehow that makes her even more precious to me. She looked out at her students. She represents all the humans who never got to live their dreams, she said. All the doctors and artists and teachers and parents who were stolen from the universe. Lyra stood up. The movement was so sudden that students around her gasped and turned to look. And the professor stopped speaking mid-sentence. I know her name, Lyra said. Her voice clear and strong in the silent hall. Professor Malvine stared at the strange student in the back row. Confused by the interruption, I beg your pardon? She asked. Lyra stepped into the aisle and began walking slowly toward the stage, and as she moved into the light, gasps of shock rippled through the audience. Her name is Alara Vance, Lyra said, and she graduated from Harvard Medical School on May 15th. 315 years ago. She reached the front of the hall and climbed the steps to the stage, her eyes fixed on the photograph floating above her. I know this because I'm her, she said, turning to face the stunned audience. That is my graduation photo. For a long moment, nobody moved or spoke. Then the lecture hall exploded into chaos. Students screamed and shouted, some in terror and some in disbelief, while others stood frozen with their mouths hanging open. Professor Malvine dropped her datapad, which shattered on the floor, and she staggered backward with her 4 hands pressed against her chest. That is impossible, she whispered. Humans are extinct, and that photograph is 300 years old. Alara smiled, the same smile from the photograph, and said, I am older than I look. Security alarms began blaring throughout the building, and red lights flashed as automated systems detected her unknown biological signature ATT-ion. A mechanical voice announced, unknown species detected in Lecture Hall 7. Security personnel responded immediately. Yella ignored the alarms and stepped closer to the trembling professor. Please do not be afraid, she said gently. I am not here to hurt anyone, and I am not a ghost. Professor Malvine stared at her with wide, unbelieving eyes. How? She managed to ask, how is this possible? Alara took a deep breath and answered the question that would reshape the galaxy. The bioweapon killed most of us, she explained. But not all of us, because a small percentage of humans proved immune to the virus. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small device that projected a holographic display of her. On about 40,000 humans survived the silence, she continued, and they fled to the edges of the galaxy, beyond mapped space, where the hegemony could not find them. The display showed tiny ships escaping into the darkness, carrying the last remnants of humanity to safety. For 300 years, we hid and rebuilt and waited, Alara said. And now there are 400 million of us living in secret colonies that no one in this galaxy knows exist. The audience was completely silent now, every eye fixed on her, every mind struggling to process what they were hearing. Professor Malvine collapsed into a chair, her legs no longer able to support her. Humanity survived, she breathed. You survived. Alara nodded and looked out at the sea of alien faces staring at her. We watched you from the shadows, she said. We saw you fight the hegemony in our name, and we saw you build a better galaxy from the ashes of their empire. She smiled again, and this time tears were streaming down her face. We have been waiting to find out if we could trust you, she admitted, waiting to see if the galaxy that mourned us would welcome us back. She raised her device higher, and the display changed to show something that made every student in the room cry out in wonder. Ships, hundreds of beautiful ships, floating in the darkness of space with lights shining like stars. The hidden fleet is ready, Alara announced, and humanity is finally coming home. The lecture hall had become something new, something that had never existed before in the history of the galaxy. It had become the place where the dead returned to life. Security officers burst through the doors with weapons raised, but they stopped immediately when they saw the holographic display showing the hidden fleet. "Stand down," Professor Malvine commanded, rising from her chair with a strength she had not felt in decades. "This is not a threat. This is a miracle." The officers lowered their weapons slowly, their eyes fixed on Alara with expressions of wonder and disbelief. Alara continued her explanation, a voice calm and steady despite the enormity of what she was revealing. "I was sent here 5 years ago as a scout," she said, "one of many scattered across the Galactic Concord to observe and report." She looked at Professor Malvine with genuine affection. "I chose to attend your lectures because I had heard you were the galaxy's greatest expert on human history," she explained. "And I wanted to know how you remembered us." The professor's eyes filled with fresh tears. "I have dedicated my entire life to preserving your memory," she said softly. "And now I find that you were sitting in my classroom all along." Alara nodded and reached out to take the professor's hand. "We know," she said. "We have been watching everything, and we know which species mourned us and which ones celebrated our death." She turned back to the audience of students, many of whom were now crowding closer to the stage to see her better. The Valkorians were among the first to speak. "Out against the hegemony's genocide," she said. "Your ancestors risked everything to try to save my people, and we have never forgotten." Professor Malvine made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. "We failed," she said. "We tried, but we could not save you." "You saved more than you know," Alara replied. "Your compassion and your courage inspired other species to join the fight. And eventually, the hegemony fell because of what you started." She addressed the whole room now, raising her voice so everyone could hear. "Humanity did not survive because we were strong," she declared. "We survived because others believed we were worth saving. And we survived because we refused to give up hope." Chidrix pushed through the crowd and stood at the edge of the stage, her compound eyes glistening with moisture. "Lyra," she called out, using the name she had known for 3 years. Alara. "I do not know what to say." Alara smiled at her friend. "You do not have to say anything," she replied. "Your friendship over these years has said everything I needed to hear." She pulled a small device from her pocket again and pressed a button. "This signal is being broadcast to every screen in the Galactic Concord," she announced. "And my people are watching this moment from the edge of the galaxy." The holographic display expanded to show faces. Millions of human faces looking back at the lecture hall through cameras aboard the Hidden Fleet children, pressed against windows to see the alien world on their screens old. People wept with joy at the sight of a galaxy they had only known through stories. Families held each other and whispered prayers of thanks. "We have been afraid for 300 years, Alara said. "Afraid that the galaxy would hate us for surviving. Afraid that we would be hunted again. Afraid that hope was just a pretty lie we told ourselves to keep going." She paused and looked at the aliens surrounding her, their faces full of wonder and tears. "But you taught me that we were wrong to be afraid," she continued. "Every lecture I attended, every act of kindness I witnessed, every friend I made showed me that the galaxy has changed." Professor Malvine stepped forward and did something that shocked everyone in the room. She wrapped all 4 of her arms around Alara and pulled her into a tight embrace. "Welcome home," she whispered. "Welcome home, child of humanity." The lecture hall erupted into cheering and crying and shouting. And suddenly students were rushing the stage to touch Alara, to confirm that she was real. To be part of this impossible moment, security officers watched in bewilderment, their training useless against an outbreak of pure joy. Alara held up her hands for silence, and gradually the noise subsided. "I have one more thing to show you," she said. A message from the leader of the Hidden Fleet. The display changed to show a single human, an old man with white hair and kind eyes, standing on the bridge of a massive ship. "People of the Galactic Concord," he said, his voice warm and gentle. "My name is Admiral James Chun. And I am the great-grandson of Marcus Chen, the philosopher whose words you have preserved in your archives." He smiled. And it was a human smile, full of hope and determination. 300 years ago, my ancestor wrote that humans do not hope because they have a chance, but have a chance because they hope, he continued. Today I stand before you as living proof of those words. He gestured behind him, and the camera pulled back to reveal the full scale of the hidden fleet. 400 million humans wait in the darkness, he said. Children who have never seen Earth, elders who remember the screams of the dying, and everyone in between. His expression grew serious. We do not come seeking revenge, he declared. The hegemony is dead, and we will not resurrect their cruelty by becoming cruel ourselves. He paused and looked directly into the camera. We come seeking something far more precious than vengeance, he said. We come seeking friendship. The display showed the fleet beginning to move, thousands of ships turning toward the light of the galaxy. We would very much like to be your neighbors again, Admiral Chun said with a gentle smile. We would like to share our stories and learn yours, to build new things together and remember the old things we lost. He spread his arms wide. We would like to laugh with you and cry with you and hope with you, he concluded. Because that is what humans do, and we have been alone for far too long. The message ended, and the lecture hall was silent. Then Chitrix began to clap, her hard hands making sharp sounds that echoed through the room. Another student joined her, then another, then 100 more, until the entire hall was thundering with applause. Professor Malvine was crying openly now, making no attempt to hide her tears. All my life I have taught about humanity, she said to Alara. And all my life I wished I could have met one of you. She took Alara's hands in her own. Now I find that I knew one all along, she said. And she was one of my best students, Alara laughed. And the sound was pure human joy. You were an excellent teacher, she replied. And now you can teach the truth instead of a tragedy. She looked out at the audience one final time. Humanity is not a lost civilization, she declared. We are a found one, and we are ready to write the next chapter of our story with all of you. In the weeks that followed, the hidden fleet arrived at the borders of the Galactic Concord, and the galaxy that had mourned humanity for 3 centuries finally got to celebrate their return. And in every school and archive and lecture hall, teachers began updating their courses. Humanity was no longer a cautionary tale. They were a love story, and the ending was just beginning.